Welcome everybody to our pickup webinar for December 4th, 2023. We are excited tonight to hear from Alex Shavansky. He's a lecturer at MIT working on online courses, very interested in delivering hands-on activities through interactive notebooks, much like I expect we'll see some of tonight. So Alex, please go ahead and talk to us about computational data science and physics.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. I am pleased to be invited to talk to you all. I had the chance to give a little bit of this talk at AAPT this past summer, but I've kind of fleshed it out a little, and I have some notebooks that I hope to kind of share with you all. So this is a little more of a detailed version of that. So I'm going to be talking about a computational data science course that we've run at MIT for several different iterations, and I'll speak about that. And it's an undergrad and graduate level, kind of mixed level course. And again, it's offered in several different formats. So firstly, a little bit about myself. I work at MIT as a lecturer, which is an academic staff kind of role. And at MIT, I'm a part of two different groups. One is the physics education group inside the physics department, where I teach some in-person classes, I mentor students, I support education initiatives and undertake some PER work. I'm also part of a group called the Digital Learning Lab, which is a cohort of postdocs and lecturers at the Institute across many different departments. And all of these people are working on developing online course content, which is run for both the benefit of MIT students. So MIT students will interact with some of this online content in their courses through this platform we use called MITx. But it's also globally facing. So we develop full courses for global learners, and anyone can take them. So I'm coming at this talk from wearing both of these kinds of hats, and I'm going to be talking about this course from both of those types of perspectives. But one thing I wanted to say here, the global, the platform where we have our courses is MITx Online. Okay, so yes, I'm here to talk about this course. We name all of our courses by numbers. So this is called ADAS50. And it's a course that was originally created by Professor Phil Harris. So I didn't create the content, but I helped develop it and run it in different ways over the past few years. It's a course that runs the gamut from probability and statistics up through machine learning applied to real physics data sets. And it's, again, it's an online course that anyone could enroll in. And we have a version of that the students themselves take. It's a modular course that's broken up into several kind of units. Each one is culminating in a project. And the projects are based on scientific data, for instance, from LIGO or LHC data. And we run it in Jupyter notebooks. So I like this kind of GIF that shows machine learning trying to fit this data set. It's always good to have a GIF. So the purpose of my talk is to give an overview of this course and the different implementations so far. And there are, it's kind of broad. So the way I've organized it is I'll talk a little bit about our motivation and objectives for creating this course. I'll try to not talk so much before I get into an actual example, which would be interesting to see. And then after looking at that example, I'll talk more about the design considerations that went into how we've designed the content, and then a little bit about how it's differed from course run to course run. So I think many of us have included such language in various talks. We've seen it before, but modern computational methods are increasingly important to learn, especially for doing real physics work. And many of the students at MIT and undergrads more broadly engage in internships where they may be applying computational methods, but maybe they haven't learned them in an actual course before that time. And at MIT, there was a lack of computation-focused physics courses. Some of these existed in computer science, but not specifically in physics. And ultimately, it's also the mandate of the department to cultivate new ways to teach interdisciplinary physics. And there's, for instance, a new PhD track at MIT in physics, statistics, and data science, which is kind of in the middle of a Venn diagram of these different fields. So with that kind of background, an opportunity for a new course arose in 2020, as 2020 provided many opportunities in a way. But in particular, because the junior lab that students take on campus, where they are taking data from real instruments in the lab, had to be done remotely. So partly the labs were redesigned to analyze open source data, which students could do at home. And after the pandemic kind of receded, the idea was to continue this course, which is what Professor Phil Harris did in January of 2021. So the first time that this course was offered was in this January session, which is called an independent activities period at MIT. It's a very condensed time, just a month, where students can take a whole entire course. There are many interesting ones like glass blowing, for instance. So this was occurring during that kind of experimental time period. And the course covered, it was pretty much the full course as it exists now, but very, very condensed. And it covered everything from statistical tools up through deep learning. And it ran for 2 different years. And in each time it ran, it had about 10 or so students. So since this course had been developed and was running in January, we applied at our institute for a grant to develop an online version. And this, the money that funded this is called an MITx grant. And in 2022, we were able to run the first online version that was for global learners. So the course didn't yet exist as a full course at MIT beyond the kind of experimental version that was already happening. But we took basically 1/3 of that content and we created a 7-week course that ran last December through February. And that course last year, when it ran, it had 750 students in it. In the following semester, so last spring, the department approved a full semester course, which was a mixed undergrad graduate level course where the full amount of content was taught through the full spring semester, and about 15 students took that course. At the same time, like concurrently, we were developing the second online module for global learners for MITx Online, which ran this past summer, and it ended in August. And that second module, Module 2, had about 300 students. So we are developing the last third of the course right now. It already exists. It has been running, it ran last spring, but we are kind of organizing and structuring the material so we can create this course that should run next year. So amongst all of these iterations, consistently the course explores methods of computational data analysis using real data sets. And there's one project for each of these modules of the course. So 8S50.1, for instance, the project culminated in analysis of LIGO data. And we have structured this so that they're run in Jupyter notebooks with a public Git repository. And everything is also compatible with Colab. So you don't have to just run these Jupyter notebooks on your local machine. You can run them in the cloud. So before I talk more about the course, I should talk about everyone involved in that timeline that I just went through, which includes faculty, postdocs, grad students, and undergrads, a large team, and perhaps I'm even forgetting some people from this list. But the first person here, Phil Harris, it was his kind of conception of this course when it initially ran. So I want to give a little view of some topics at a glance. And let me just check for a second. Oh, yes. Okay. So I want to just give you an overview of the topics, and then we'll look at an actual notebook. In Module 1, it starts out with probability and statistics and error propagation, chi-squared analysis and likelihood using LM-FIT. And the whole goal of Module 1 is to be able to fit a signal of a gravitational wave from a black hole binary pair merger. So students develop the ideas of what it means to fit a curve to a data set. We also include some content on Fourier analysis, because if you have a signal in a time domain, often it's more convenient to look in the frequency domain. So in Module 2, students are working on understanding Bayesian statistics and more likelihood hypothesis testing. And here's where we introduce concepts of deep learning also, in order to try to learn information from data sets from the LHC, specifically properties of W and Z bosons. The last third of the course has to do with numerical simulations. And that is the part that we are developing for our online version that's coming a bit later in 2024. And then sprinkled in, this is not a one-to-one correspondence. There are a few other topics and examples that don't quite fit into these modules the way I've presented them here. So yeah, I'd like to show an example of a notebook. So we're going to look at the very first notebook in the course. And Brian, yes, thank you for reposting that. Let me share my screen to a different. Yes, here we go. So I wanted to share a notebook and discuss some characteristics, and then afterwards I'll talk about the thought that went into that. So firstly, here's one of the notebooks. Each notebook corresponds to a lesson. Well, I'll put it maybe better this way. Each lesson has a corresponding notebook, and whether a professor is giving a live presentation in the classroom of this content, or whether there are videos that students are engaging with online when they're going through this lesson, it's meant to be kind of a one lecture group of content. And the lessons are divided into sections. So here at the top, you could see this has 6 different sections. And let me also show the local version, because maybe here's one that is not being run in Google Colab. You can see some of the formatting a little better, but we've designed it so it's as easy as possible for students to navigate amongst all of the content. So we have this navigation bar to all of the sections and the exercises within the sections. And a lot of thought went into the usability of this, and also ensuring that it was compatible with the Colab version as well. So each section has, well, at the top of the notebook, there are a set of executable cells that import libraries or perhaps install packages, define some default settings, things that students should be able to run these cells, and they're all set for the rest of the notebook here. Each section has some explanatory material and cells that students can run. And sometimes also it includes slides. So let's see, I can look for slides. This is a section where we have some slides within the notebook as well. So everything is self-contained, and we view these notebooks the way we're using them as kind of like a living, breathing textbook. And we want the students to kind of make it their own also. So the other thing that I'll say about all of these sections is at the end of every section, there's a set of exercises. So we want these, each section of the lesson to be a formative kind of experience for the students. We want them to be able to test their knowledge. So we have these exercises interspersed. And I'll talk a little bit more about how students are answering those exercises. But one of them, for instance, is asking about a numerical answer. One is asking them to complete some code. Okay. Let me go back to my other screen. Okay, so we wanted these notebooks to be living textbooks for the students. And this is just a brief summary of some of the things that I was describing. Students can run them in the cloud. The file structure is the same whether they're downloading, running a cell that downloads data in the Colab version or in the local version. We have the data stored in a Git repository, and everything has this relative correspondence. So no matter where you're using it, downloading the data and using the data makes just works. All right. Yes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the answer checkers. So these notebooks have places where students have exercises where students can run some code, can try out new things, try to answer a problem, and we have a way for them to check their results, which is something that lives outside of the notebook. So this is kind of an extra component. It is these answer checkers are written in an LTI called CatSoup. And in my workflow, which I'm happy to talk more about, I'm not going to describe it right now. I write these answer checkers also as I write the notebook, but they live in this other place, and since they're in LTI, they're platform agnostic, and they can be used in Canvas, for instance, or our platform that we use for our online courses called MITx Online. The types of exercises that we have students do involve code or numeric response or multiple choice. There are other types as well. And when students are engaging with these exercises, be it the MIT students or the online learners, we allow unlimited attempts because we want this to be kind of a formative experience. We want them to try things and perhaps get things wrong until they get them right. So if you want to learn more about CatSoup, this LTI, there's a link, and I can talk more about that at the end also. So let me show, so here's an example of what this looks like in Canvas. It looks just like it would look in the notebook, and students have the option here to run the code, to save their, what they've typed. And on the back end, this CatSoup LTI will grade the response and give some feedback. And again, this was used in Canvas for our on-campus students. And let me show the version that is in our online course. Let me reshare my other screen. Okay. So here in our online course, there's a correspondence to the notebooks that I was just showing you. This is example 111. It's the first example of the first exercise in the first section. And what that looks like in the notebook is, let's see if we can find it. this is what it looks like in the notebook from the student's perspective. This doesn't have an answer. They have to type in, they have to define an exponential function. And once they've played with it in their notebook, they can copy and paste their answer into the online answer checker and see if it's right or not. And we also grade it for credit. While I'm here on this page, I want to talk a little bit more briefly about this online course structure. So here, every part of the notebook is corresponds to its own kind of unit of content. And here in the very first section, there's a related video. The video appears on our online course. It doesn't appear in the Jupyter notebook itself. If a professor were presenting this content in the class, they would be presenting it live. They wouldn't be sharing this video. But for our online learners, this is the resource that we have. So there's a video describing what is done in this section, and Professor Harris in the video runs these cells and talks a bit about them. And there's a one-to-one correspondence. If we go to L 1.2, there's some other content. And if we go to L 1.2 in the notebook, it should be that same content. So let me go back to my presentation. Let's see. That's it. Oh, that's not it. Oh, one moment. I can't find it again. There we go. Sorry about that. So that was a bit about the answer checkers and the design of the online course and the one-to-one correspondence with the notebooks that we hope makes things very easy and straightforward for students, no matter how they prefer to learn, whether they just want to go through the notebook or watch the video content, whether they're listening to a live lecture by a professor, or maybe they didn't make it to class, but they're still doing that piece of content. So now I'll talk a bit about the projects in the course, which have a similar structure, where there's some amount of explanatory material with some exercises interspersed. And we treat the exercises within the project kind of like checkpoints, where students are confirming that they're getting what they expect as they go along. But ultimately, the projects are open-ended and graded by a rubric. So let me show an example of a project, and then I'll go back to the rubric on this page. So this is an example of what we expect students to be able to do in the project for the first module. And students are taking data from LIGO, which is strain versus time. So it's some time domain signal, and they're doing some data processing to the signal that they will have learned earlier in the course, or perhaps earlier in that notebook, and ultimately cleaning it up and trying to fit a signal. And they're fitting this red line, this signal, which represents a merger of a binary pair of black holes by some of the LM fit methods they learned earlier in the course. And they're applying maybe a windowing procedure where they're trying to fit to some window in time, and they're sliding that along the way and trying to characterize if the fit is good or not for each window. So for our projects, and they could do this in a number of ways. So the rubric for this project has fully correct incomplete analysis. I realized I didn't re-share. There we go. a fully correct and complete analysis would receive full points if students correctly partitioned the data into slices of time and ran this LM-fit procedure to try to fit a signal to different time slices, and if they properly characterize the significance based on what they would have learned in the semester. But it's very broad, and ultimately we want students to engage with the project, and it doesn't necessarily matter if they do it the way that we would expect, and that's why it's open-ended. So for our MIT students, these are graded by the professor and the TAs, and for our MIT online students, they're graded by each other. So here is just a brief overview of the content specific to the first module. And I'm happy to return to this slide, but I just wanted to show how it's organized. There are 2 lessons or so per week, and there are also problem sets that are kind of like lessons, but they don't have videos. They're more like homework problems. And ultimately, there are 8 lessons amongst the 3 weeks, and then a final project. So I wanted to also highlight some of the data, the way that the different data sets are used in this first module. So I'm just going to briefly go through these a few slides, and we can return to them if people would like to see more. But for instance, in lesson 2, we're using data from Fermilab while talking about how to propagate uncertainties correctly, because for this particular data set, there was a signal that was kind of erroneous, and when the errors were properly taken into account, it went away. So this was illustrative of that idea. Here, on the lesson on linear regression, we're fitting supernova data, so distance versus redshift, to find the Hubble constant. And you can go out to farther and farther redshifts, or you can constrain the data in different ways, or use uncertainties in different ways, and you'll get different fit values. So we use that as a launching point to talk about that. Here's some data on cosmic ray flux, and students are trying to understand whether this flux varies with position on the sky. And that was lesson 5. In lesson 8, students are using neutrino data. I forget what exactly this lesson was about. And then ultimately at the end of this module, they're fitting the LIGO data. So all of these data sets are open source, and I've shown the sources here, and the sources are clearly marked in the notebooks also. All right, so I'm heading towards the end of what I had to share, but I have more to talk about if you like. But to summarize, we have a set of new courses that we've offered that offer students a more authentic experience with modern scientific computing techniques. And we used Jupyter notebooks because it's open source, it's easy to use. The barrier for students to use a Jupyter notebook is low, especially if they're using it in Colab. The course content was designed for a range of backgrounds. So when we ran it at MIT during the semester, it was in a mixed undergrad, graduate level course. I didn't talk much about this, but the projects, the open-ended projects, have supplements also, which students who are more advanced could try to do. For instance, the LIGO project, in the main part, you're fitting a gravitational wave signal, and then in the supplements, you're trying to constrain that, where the origin of that signal was in the sky by looking at data sets from two different instruments. Because this course was modular and the exercises are created in this LTI, we can use it a lot of different ways in Canvas during the semester, or in our online course on MITx Online, the other platform. And we hope that this modularity helps students engage with the contents. Well, we use the modularity to engage with different students in different ways. Some of the student feedback from the online learners. They thought that the content of the course was organized in a very modern way. Some students hadn't seen Jupyter notebooks before, and they liked that the notebooks were kind of self-contained and they were able to progress through them in a way they hadn't experienced before. Uh, the online learners appreciated that they have these notebooks to keep. So they downloaded them from the repository. They have ownership over them and they can edit them how they like, and kind of keep them and go back to them later on as they like. These students appreciated the expertise of the professor who developed the content, Professor Phil Harris. He has a background in using deep learning for dark matter, for searching for dark matter. So this is kind of his expertise. Ultimately, the students said that this was a lot. This was a little bit much for them, at least in terms of, the pace of the online class. So we may expand the timetable and allow the course to be open for longer in the future. As it is, the way the course was planned was that there are 3 weeks of content and a 4th week for a project, but each module is open for 7 weeks. So effectively, you can budget your time to do things in half the amount of time or twice the amount of time if you need to. So finally, we are looking forward to continuing to provide this resource and expand upon it. We have module 3 rolling out later this year. And the course is now officially a part of the undergrad and graduate curriculum at MIT. So it's going to run again in the spring semester, and we'll continue to iterate and design, new modules or new project ideas as we go. And importantly, this work has informed how we plan to utilize notebooks potentially in other physics courses. We wanted to incorporate them into more of the undergraduate curriculum, for instance, the first year curriculum. So in our intro physics courses, but we haven't quite found the right way. And I think using the design aspects that we used for these lessons could be a way to kind of streamline things for students and lower the barrier for use if we intend to use Jupyter notebooks. And of course, I also want to give a special thanks to Professor Harris and the MIT Open Learning for funding the development of this course. So with that, I'll take your questions.
All right, let's take a minute or not a minute, let's take a second to express our gratitude to our speaker in the chat with whatever emoji or message of thanks you would like to post. We do have a question from Marie in chat. She says, thank you for sharing. I agree with the students that this seems like a lot in a short amount of time. And I'm curious, what is the background for these students? Have they programmed before, taken intro physics classes, taken upper level physics classes? How do they get help when needed, especially with debugging?
Yeah, so our MIT students are mostly, I think, juniors and seniors. So they will have taken our junior level courses. So some of them may have had experience with programming before, but I don't think we have any prerequisite for the course. We have kind of an on-ramp notebook that brings you through some of the basic ways that you might use a Jupyter notebook and how to, manipulate data or, create arrays and plot things, do some basic commands. But I think maybe people who are interested in the course, at least MIT students, probably would have taken a little bit, may have had some experience prior. In terms of our online learners, I don't know that we have, I think we suggest Python as a prereq. I was going to look up the prereqs before this talk, actually. But we have a wide array of learners with a wide array of expertise. And what I hope to see and what I often see on the forums is people helping each other in posting questions, and other people will provide suggestions or answers. But that takes work to cultivate that kind of culture in the discussion forum. So that's not always the case necessarily.
But what I also like about the way you've structured the course is that, a student doesn't need a course in gravitational waves to fit data from gravitational waves experiment. Like, they can work with the data and kind of learn where it came from or what it means along the way, right? Because you're focused on the actual data analysis piece. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we would love to get more questions. Feel free to post a question in the chat or unmute your microphone. So all the links from the slides have been posted in the chat, and those will be available afterwards as well. Feel free to peruse, see if that generates any questions.
I could always go to my additional slides.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's see what we have. Let me.
Amy in chat would love to hear more about setting up a course with Cat Soup. That reminds me, I had a similar question about how you embedded the Jupyter notebook into a Canvas page. I'd be particularly interested in that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer as much as I can. Let's go to that slide. So I do not have expertise on the way that a Cat Soup was set up to run this course. So we have another colleague, Professor Ike Shuang, who helped develop Cat Soup and proposed that we use it. It's an open source program, and so far as I know, you run it on a server, and it's running and it's checking the answers based on the code that you've written for the answer checker. But it's kind of, it's an independent process that is open source, which one could learn how to set up. For our use, we have a colleague who set it up for us. And Professor Ike Shuang uses it in computer science courses at MIT also. So yeah, I don't know if of use cases beyond, but I would like to, yeah, I'm happy to help as much as I can in that respect. And then, Brian, your question was about embedding the notebooks in Canvas. And what we have is not the notebook itself embedded in Canvas, but what we've very purposely made to look like part of the notebook. So this example 10.1.1 is a part of the Cat Soup LTI. So it's the answer checker in Canvas, but we've made the notebook look as much as possible like this answer checker, so students, can move fluently between the two.
Okay, so it's replicating it, not necessarily taking a thing from Colab and embedding there. Okay, well, maybe someday.
Yeah, that's what my dream had been for our other courses as well, to be able to embed a Jupyter notebook in Canvas or another platform and run code. That's not what's happening here. So you can execute this cell and check its output, but you can't really make it, you can't really write a whole bunch of new code and create other cells or anything like that. I was going to say something else. Oh yeah. As much as I would like to embed an actual notebook in a learning platform, I think it's a more authentic experience to use a notebook on its own, like one would do if they're running in Colab, or if you were running it from your terminal or whatever. So that's always how I kind of argue against it.
That's true. I'm thinking for my freshman biology majors taking Physics 1, and I would like to onboard them to a little bit of Jupyter Notebook, but yeah, that's a good point. Other questions, either in the chat or feel free to unmute your microphone.
I could go to my slides, but I suppose I have a question for everyone, which is, to what extent does what we've done here mirror what you have done in terms of, do you use notebooks that are kind of one lesson, one-to-one correspondence with lessons? Do you use Google Colab in this way? What have people tried?
So I've also used Jupyter notebooks, and I do tend to have that one-to-one correspondence between a lesson and a Jupyter notebook.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, please.
Well, I was going to ask, do you expect that students should be running them locally and download Anaconda or something? Or
No, we have a really our student population doesn't necessarily have access to a computer.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they're actually working on their phones, which they're very adept at.
Yeah.
But it need like that, so we use Google Colab extensively. And we've looked at sometimes sometimes it's a little bit limiting because I can't do a whole lot of setup on the Google Colab side. For some upper division courses, I'm looking at using our local cluster. We have a Jupyter server,
Mm-hmm.
like an interactive nodes that use open on demand that can spawn Jupyter notebooks, like Jupyter notebook environments.
Yeah.
But yeah, for my intro class, I sort of shove them into the world of like, you're going to make Jupyter notebooks, but at least they do it through Google Colab, and that really eases the transition for them.
Yeah, students tend to like Colab because many of them are already doing stuff in Google Drive. And if you just explain it as this is Google Docs, but with programming, they tend to ease into it a bit better. I've been using Jupyter Notebooks this semester in, for the first time, a physics of music class to run my lab activities. And so all my lab, kind of like what you're talking about in terms of each notebook is a lesson, each notebook is a lab activity, and they import their data, they do their data analysis there, and then they copy over that notebook and they turn that into their report that they're writing at the end.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. So they generate a report, and how do you grade that report?
So I have a specifications rubric that I use. So it's the same rubric every time. It mostly follows the claim evidence reasoning model, where they've got to show me some evidence for the claim they're trying to make, and they've got to connect those two with reasoning through some physics principles.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one was rough. Like, they were not really sure how to write it. They weren't really sure what to include. They weren't even sure what they did in the lab. But by the time we went through the revision cycle once or twice, once each student kind of got that rubric down the first time, the second time they pretty much all wrote it perfectly the first time. And so I was able to get them trained on scientific writing, even though they have very limited background there.
That's great. I have another question for the group.
Go for it.
Which is, so I think it's escaped me. I was going to ask something about grading, a little bit more about grading, but I've forgotten. It'll come back. Oh, I recall now. It wasn't about grading. It was about giving solution sets. So if you have a notebook and do you expect that the students are solving things in the notebook and then turning something in, and then will you give them solutions to those exercises, and how do you maintain, versions of your notebook without and with solutions.
Go ahead, Amy.
I'm sorry. I have this unmute button and it's too much power for me to handle. Okay. So the students that when I'm doing computing, I'm almost always doing it. So I'd be curious. Okay. When I'm doing computing, I'm almost always doing it in the context of this is optional and I want you to try this. And if you've tried it, then you get full credit for it, because I'm often I wouldn't say shoehorning. I'm often forcing, like, it's like, congratulations, you signed up for my intro E&M class. We're going to be programming the entire time. You don't have a choice. So that's freaks students out. And so I'm like, I want you to try to engage with this as best as you can. Anyway, so a lot of times I'm giving them Jupyter notebooks and asking them to write code in there, and then so we're not going through the trouble of like we're not going through the trouble of trying to do any kind of like making sure that students aren't copying it. We love it when they copy off each other, as you know, especially if they're typing it out, which they generally need to do because we don't tell them how to use version control to get around typing it out. And so they just get credit for typing in new code into the Jupyter notebook and turning that in. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what I don't know is for a class where, this class is officially a programming class, and the expectation is that you actually write program as part of your homework. I don't know what I would do there. I'd be curious to know, for those of you who are doing that. But yeah, for me, with adding it to a class that's not that's not specifically a computational class, yeah, I don't worry about it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, my philosophy. Go ahead. Yeah, my philosophy is I never grade the code. I grade the thing they write about what the code did, which means they can't write it up if the code didn't work. But I'm not gonna grade the code on how pretty it is, or how efficient it is, or even really how accurate it is. Like I grade what they wrote about what the program did, because if they can describe to me what the program did, then they have learned something about programming.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. For the version of this course that's online facing, we thought a lot about solutions and how students would engage with solutions. And I thought a lot about a workflow where I have a notebook that has the solutions and a notebook that doesn't, because we're always changing things. So that became important for us to kind of establish some way to do it so that you're updating both copies. So let's see, I can share a little bit and see if it works this time.
Just really quick while you're looking for that, Claudia says, I do not give them solutions, but some milestones they need to try to achieve in an exercise. And I ask to explain a large portion of the steps they write in a solution.
Okay.
Oh, one other thing I found, a neat little technical trick I learned about. So the markdown cells in a Jupyter notebook, they handle some limited HTML formatting. And HTML includes this little drop-down spoiler text where you can put I think it's called summary and details. And so like what I tend to do is I'll say, click here for a hint. And they can click there and it'll expand to, here's what your code should look like. And so for kind of those more middle of the road exercises, I tend to give those so that if they get stuck, they have an answer, but they're not seeing it straight away.
I really like that. So some dynamic hints within a notebook that just works with a button, basically.
Right. Yeah.
That's really cool. We haven't done hints like that. I'd like to perhaps add that. So, for us, we have a solution set. And here's an example of the solution. So here's LO1. And if we go to exercises, there's the exercise with some code that's missing. And then here's the solution. So the students don't see that. But I think in at least one of the courses, we disseminated this notebook. We write them because we have to write them within the cat soup answer checker. And that is the place where after they're done, they can click show answer and see this part here. And since these, we have a focus on the online learners who we may not get to engage with fully or, always give feedback. We want to make sure that the feedback that they can get from what we've written is like as extensive as possible. So we have these solution notebooks that exist, and I think at least a couple times we've shared them with the MIT students. The online students don't get this notebook, but I have worked on a method to create these different versions from one notebook where, let's see. What I've done here is within a notebook, I call this the main notebook. So this is the one that I would be editing. And some of these cells, let's go to the exercises. There's some funny language with how I've defined things. But the solution cells are designated with the solution tag. So I run code on this Jupyter notebook that makes a copy, but deletes anything that's tagged with a solution. And that's kind of my way of maintaining a version control where I'm not having to edit many different notebooks. So I don't know if that is interesting or helpful for people, but it's kind of what we figured out to do.
That's really interesting to me. I'm always trying to figure out how I can not duplicate code, and I tend to just not provide solutions to my students for this reason. Yep. So I would be curious, like on your GitHub website, do you have like a workflow? Do you talk about the workflow that you use for this? Is there? I'm curious if you are using like PaperPile or not PaperPile, but there anyway, Paper Mill, I think it is anyway, but just knowing more about how you handle the workflow for this would be super awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about it. I don't have it really documented in a public place. I have it half documented in my own, space. So yeah, I can write that up a little bit more, and I'm happy to share that. In short, I have another notebook which runs a script on this notebook and creates all of the different versions that I want. We also have, let me see if I can find it. So many different versions. This is a little silly, but that's okay. We have a version that we provide for the students and the online learners, anyone, both cohorts, which is totally stripped of the text, because a lot of people, I think, could get bogged down in reading and going through, but maybe especially if they're watching a video, they just want to do the things in the video and they don't want to have to scroll and scroll. So this kind of like how the version of the notebook that students see is stripped of solutions, this notebook is stripped of anything that's not an executable cell. So except for the text around the exercises that they have to do. So I don't have, I don't know if I have data on how many people prefer to use this version, the stripped down version. But at least some people have said that they use it. see. Go back to my presentation. So if anyone is interested in following up on these things, for instance, was it Amy who was talking about the workflow? I'm happy to discuss over email.
I also sent Alex the link to the PICUP Slack earlier, which as a reminder, if you have not done so, please join us on the PICUP Slack where we continue these conversations throughout the academic year. Let me get the link to the sign up for that in the chat for everybody. I think I recognize all the names here, if it's just in case. Awesome. Well, we are at our usually advertised ending time. I am happy to keep the Zoom room open for further questions, but I know folks probably have other commitments they need to get to this evening. So I will go and stop the recording also so that if anybody has any questions they want to ask without a recording being taken, you can do so. Otherwise, let's please take another opportunity to thank our speaker in the chat or over your cameras. Alex, thank you so much for the wonderful insights and conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure to meet you all.